What if every great empire, Rome, Spain, Britain, and now America, didn't collapse because of war, corruption, or moral decay, but because of money? What if behind every golden age lies a fatal pattern, one that starts with trust, grows with ambition, and ends with debt? Today, the headlines talk about inflation, trillion-dollar deficits, and digital currencies. But this isn't new. It eyes the same financial heartbeat that has driven the rise and fall of empires for 2,000 years. The Roman Denarius, the Spanish silver real, the British pound. Each became the world's reserve currency, the coin everyone wanted. Until one day they didn't. And now the US dollar stands at that same crossroads. Can a paper promise still hold an empire together in a world of instant capital flight and digital gold? Some say the next superpower, China, is already studying that playbook, ready to rewrite it for the 21st century. But history whispers a warning. The cycle never breaks. It only repeats. So, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if you're here for unfiltered history and uncomfortable truths, subscribe now. Because by the end of this video, you might see the world's economy in a completely different light. Let's go back, way back to the empire that started it all, Rome. For centuries, Rome's silver denarius was the most trusted currency in the known world. It built armies, roads, and an empire that spanned continents. One denarius equaled one day's wage for a legionnaire. It was stability, order, power. But expansion is expensive. As Rome grew, so did its costs. Soldiers, trade routes, entertainment for the masses. The empire taxed its citizens heavily, borrowed from provinces, and then, when that wasn't enough, began to debase the currency. Under Emperor Nero, the silver content of the denarius dropped from 100% to 90%. A century later, it was below 5%. Prices soared. Trust eroded. And by the 3rd century, even soldiers refused to be paid in silver. Rome's economy fractured long before its walls fell. Sound familiar? Fast forward to 16th century Spain. The discovery of silver in the Americas flooded Europe with wealth. For a time, Spain became the richest nation on earth. But as silver ships arrived by the ton, inflation surged. The more money Spain mined, the less it was worth. By the 1600s, prices across Europe had risen 5-fold. Spanish debt ballooned. The empire defaulted 4 times in a century. Too much silver, too little discipline. The empire of gold drowned in its own treasure. Sound familiar again? Then came Britain. At its peak, the British pound backed more than 60% of global trade. London was the financial capital of the world. The pound was as good as gold, literally. But wars have a cost. 2 world wars drained Britain's coffers. In 1931, it abandoned the gold standard. By 1949, the pound was devalued by 1/3. And in 1956, during the Suez Crisis, the US forced Britain to retreat by threatening to sell its pound reserves. That was the moment Britain's empire ended, not with an invasion but with a currency crisis. Now, jump to the United States. After World War II, the dollar replaced the pound as the world's reserve currency. Under the Bretton Woods system, every major economy pegged its money to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold $35 an ounce. It worked, until it didn't. By the late 1960s, the US was spending far more than it earned. Vietnam, space race, social programs. The bill came due. Foreign governments began demanding gold in exchange for dollars. So in 1971, President Nixon made the fateful decision. The US dollar would no longer be backed by gold. That moment marked the beginning of a new phase of empire, the age of faith-based money. The dollar's value now depended entirely on confidence, and for a while it worked beautifully. But as every empire learns, when money is based on trust, that trust can vanish overnight. Here's where the pattern turns modern and dangerous. Every empire believes it's smarter than the last. Rome thought it could stretch forever. Britain thought its colonies would always pay. And America? It believes it can print without consequence. Enter the Federal Reserve. Created in 1913, the Fed began as a guardian of stability. But in the 21st century, It has become something else entirely, the central engine of global liquidity. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, markets froze. Banks stopped lending. Credit evaporated. To prevent collapse, the Fed unleashed a torrent of emergency lending, not just to American banks but to the entire world. Trillions of dollars flowed across borders through something called central bank swap lines, temporary dollar loans to foreign central banks. No headlines, no votes, just quiet coordination. And in doing so, the Fed became the world's lender of last resort, the unseen spine of the global economy. But here's the twist. That power cuts both ways. By stabilizing the system, America also made the world dependent on its money supply. And the more dollars it creates, the more fragile the trust becomes. You might think that's fine, until you realize who's watching. Because as the dollar dominates, another giant is building its alternative. And you won't believe the name leading that charge. Let's just say the new empire doesn't trade in paper, it trades in code. Let's decode how this invisible empire works, and why it may be nearing its limit. The US dollar is more than national currency. It's the lifeblood of global finance. About 60% of world reserves are held in dollars. Nearly 80% of global trade is invoiced in dollars. Even foreign banks borrow and lend in dollars, creating what's called the euro-dollar system. In other words, America doesn't just issue a currency, it issues the world's operating system. But here's the paradox. When the world demands dollars, the US must supply them, and that means running perpetual deficits. In 2001, US national debt stood at $5.7 trillion. By 2008, $10 trillion. By 2024, over $35 trillion and counting. That's a 500% increase in one generation. To fund this, the Fed buys its own government's debt, creating money digitally in exchange for treasury bonds. Economists call it quantitative easing. In plain English, it's money from nothing, and while the system has survived crisis after crisis, each rescue weakens it. Every printed dollar dilutes the pool of trust. By contrast, China has studied this pattern obsessively. Instead of spreading its currency too fast, it's been building control, slowly, digitally, and strategically. Enter the digital yuan, China's central bank-backed currency, officially called DCEP, Digital Currency Electronic Payment. Unlike Bitcoin, it's not decentralized. It's fully traceable, programmable, and tied directly to the People's Bank of China. China's goal isn't to destroy the dollar overnight. It aims to create a parallel ecosystem, a financial network that doesn't rely on New York or the Fed. And step by step, it's working. The Belt and Road Initiative now spans 150 nations. In 2023 alone, trade settled in local currencies among BRICS nations surged by 40%. Meanwhile, central banks worldwide purchased 1,136 tons of gold, the largest increase in half a century. Why? Because history has taught them, empires rise on trust and hedge with metal. Still, none of this guarantees the dollar's end. America remains home to the deepest capital markets, strongest institutions, and most dynamic innovation base. But the warning signs are clear. When debt grows faster than production, when currency becomes a tool of politics, and when trust becomes policy, an empire enters its late stage. Economist Ray Dalio calls it the big cycle. Every 75 to 100 years, a dominant power emerges, leverages its currency globally, overextends financially, and then declines as others rise. Rome, Spain, Britain. The pattern repeats. And in the digital age, that cycle may be accelerating. Money moves faster, data replaces distance, and when confidence breaks, contagion spreads in seconds, not years. Consider this. In 2020, the US printed $3 trillion in a matter of months, more money than in the first 2 centuries of its existence. Inflation followed, peaking at 9.1% in 2022, the highest in 40 years. Meanwhile, wealth inequality widened dramatically. The top 1% gained $6.5 trillion in net worth during the pandemic, while millions of workers lost jobs. History doesn't repeat perfectly, but it rhymes with precision. Every empire thinks it will be the exception. Rome believed its legions would last forever. Spain believed its silver would never run dry. Britain believed its navy made it untouchable. And America believes the dollar will always reign. But the math says otherwise. The empire of spreadsheets is now facing its greatest test. Can confidence survive inflation, polarization, and digital disruption all at once? Some analysts argue the US will adapt, as it always has. Others warn that the rise of digital currencies and geopolitical fragmentation could mark the start of a post-dollar world. The truth? No one knows exactly when the tipping point comes. History never announces the moment, only the aftermath. What's certain is that we're living through a transition bigger than any single nation. A world where money itself, how it's created, moved, and controlled, is being rewritten in real time. The next collapse may not be a crash, but a shift. From paper to code, from west to east, from trust to transparency. And when it happens, it won't look like the fall of Rome. It'll look like a screen flashing red. So ask yourself, are we wiser now, or walking the same path in better suits? If this made you think, share it. If you want more deep dives into how history's hidden patterns still shape our wallets today, subscribe. Because empires don't die in battles, they die in balance sheets. And right now, the numbers are telling a story worth listening to.